So this morning, I am very excited to interview and spend a little bit of time with Pastor John Pumphrey. John is one of the three chaplains in a new initiative here in the Delaware-Maryland Synod. And so I wanted to spend some time with John. John has been an Episcopalian priest for many years. He's been a chaplain. He's got a lot of experience. And we're going to talk this morning on the topic of feedback. So it's great to spend some time with you, John.
Thanks, Stu. It's good to be with you too this morning.
Excellent, excellent. Well, I know you wanted to share a little bit about something you've been reading and getting thinking about, and that's the topic of feedback, in particular the book, Thanks for the Feedback, and I'll make sure I link that in the digging deeper information. So what is so important about feedback?
Well, I thought I knew a thing or two because I had experienced a thing or two about feedback in the course of my ministry, as we all have, and in particular as a Association for Clinical Pastoral Education supervisor. I had hoped that I'd help students learn to give feedback and cope with the feedback they receive from their peers and me and others. But to be honest, over the years, I think I learned and taught more about giving feedback than getting it. And we get feedback all the time. So I came across a while ago a recently published book by Douglas Stone and Sheila Heen that you mentioned, Thanks for the Feedback. And I found it really fascinating. And their definition of feedback is pretty simple. And I'm going to channel them in our conversation. It's any information we get about ourselves. So it's pretty simple and straightforward. And we get that feedback whether we want it or not and whether we're ready for it or not. So I think that for me, it was a discovery of a new resource that taught me a lot about how to receive the feedback we get and the importance of feedback.
Yeah, I can definitely think of lots and lots of situations in life, in family, and certainly in ministry where we receive feedback.
Absolutely. We get feedback, as I say all the time, whether we want it or not. Let me give you a couple examples. Your spouse or partner tells you your shirt and sweater color doesn't match. And yea, verily, that's that. But this feedback may come within a context of your self-understanding or the relationship that makes it hard to hear. Or your parishioner, decides to tell you that he or she experiences you as too rigid about some things. Now, he or she's brave enough to tell you this and even give you an example or two, but you or I have a very different point of view, and, we know where they're coming from. So we might respond defensively, but that's a label. And in fact, Stu, a lot of the feedback we get comes in the form of labels. Labels are often experienced as those things we sometimes refer to as you statements. You're too involved, or you need to set limits, or you need to be more proactive, or the kind of uninvited advice giving that's a kind of feedback. Helpful suggestions, by people that think they're making very clear and easily understandable suggestions to us. I remember a friend of mine once said that he had a response to uninvited feedback, which was that he would give it all the consideration it was due. People that do this, they don't intend to hurt by their feedback, and they want to be helpful. They may not have attended the classes on how to give feedback, but they're trying to do something, and we'll talk a little bit more about this. The other kind of feedback that I think we get is that we give ourselves feedback. We give ourselves feedback by the kind of inner self-talk that we permit. A good bit of time, as you might know, the kind of inner self-talk that we have is more critical than it needs to be. I was fascinated with Sheila Heen and Doug Stone's categorization of feedback into three large buckets, if you will. Feedback comes in the form of appreciation, or it might come in the form of coaching, or it comes in the form of evaluation. And if we stop and think about it, we can think about instances of feedback that we've received that are in those kind of buckets. We're feeling appreciated or we're getting coached, or there's a performance evaluation or some other form of evaluation. Those are some of the ways we get feedback.
Yeah, I can definitely think about situations where I've received all of those different forms of feedback. And even just in your examples, there's like it wells up in me. It's like, well, how do I feel about that? How do I feel about that?
Exactly. I think that's they have a Stone and Heen have a wonderful way of talking about sort of summarizing why we have so much difficulty receiving feedback, and then they say it's that our ambivalence about and even our resistance to receiving feedback is because it sits at the crux of our need to learn and grow, and our need to be accepted, respected, and loved just the way we are. And I think that really hits to home for me. You know, I want to know how others see me. I want to be able to be more effective, and so I want feedback at the same time. I want to be accepted, respected, and loved for just the way I am. So I'm ambivalent about even asking for feedback.
Wow, that's a statement you could kind of live with and think about a while, but it's a great description of exactly where we are. We want to learn and grow, and yet at the same time, we kind of like who we are most of the time.
Exactly. It's really true. The fact of the matter is one of their other adages is that we are the heroes of our own stories. If we're not being too self-critical, we're the other side of it is that we are more than any other feedback that we would get. So, you know, the feedback we get sort of hits us at our sense of ourselves, and that's why it can be so threatening. They do indicate, and I like this too, that there are benefits from receiving feedback, and we ought to talk a little bit about that before we continue much further. And that's that, and we can. I think we all know this. When we've gotten feedback that we can hear and it's important to us, our relationships are richer. You know, our self-esteem becomes more secure, and we learn and we get better at things, and we feel good about that. I mean, I think feedback affects us very powerfully when it's received and has those kind of positive impacts.
Most definitely. Yeah, I can absolutely see that. I'm kind of guessing there are probably ways as well that we can kind of block or get in the way of feedback as well. Because it threatens a little bit, you know, when you're talking about our hero status that we have of ourselves.
Absolutely. So let's talk a little bit about that. In fact, that is a good bit of what Stone and Heen talk about in their book is what blocks us from receiving the feedback that we can take away from what we get. So feedback we can experience as given to us poorly or by someone we don't really trust, or feedback maybe doesn't make sense to us, or we're receiving it when we've got sort of competing commitments. You know, we're distracted by something that's more important, so it makes it hard to receive it. So there's contextual reasons that make getting feedback hard to receive. But let's start with how we see ourselves and what happens with us when it blocks us from getting feedback. There is a certain sense in which each of us has a kind of baseline that if we looked at it as a scale from 1 to 10, some of us fall towards 1, which is where we tend to see the world as less than ideal, perhaps a little more threatening. We're less optimistic and more easily dissatisfied. And I kind of put myself in that category, frankly, Stu. Some people have thought I'm a little bit like the old Smurf character, Murky Dismal, that I can see the bad coming long before it comes, and it may never even reach me. But I tend to have that scale of being closer to the 1. Then there's the 9s at their baseline. they're the optimistic ones. They're the ones that never seem to get set back on their heels. And they're to some of us, they're just plain annoying because they always see things, they see the glass half full. Well, if we see these two ends of the scales, though, what I'm saying is that they're kind of the baselines. If we are self-examining ourselves, where do we fall? Because the ones are going to have a hard time receiving positive feedback. And the nines may tend to absorb positive feedback in ways that only help them in they don't examine where there are the difficulties or the blind spots. So one of the things that gets in the way of our feedback is where we are, sort of what our baseline is. The other thing is the how quickly do we recover from when we hear negative things? I don't know what your likes do, or others of our listeners, but when I hear negative things in the past, I tended to get stuck on them. So it took me a
Oh,
while.
gee, I don't think there's any pastor who, when 10 people say good sermon and one person say it's awful, that they hold on to the 10. I don't think any of us do that. Yeah, no, we all do that. Yeah.
Yeah, that's the notion of swing or recovery. How quickly are we able to recover from the negative? In fact, I had a coach once who suggested that since I attended on the ruminative side, and I have it right here on my desk, get one of those old kitchen timers that you turn and it clicks and counts down the time. And she told me, she said, so turn it to whatever time between 0 and 60 minutes. And then you can spend all the time you want chewing on that negative feedback, as long as that thing is ticking. When it rings, you either stop, or if you want to turn it on and spend some more time doing that, after a while, you'll realize you're spending far too much time chewing on the negative feedback. Is that what you really want to do?
I like it. I like it. Yeah.
There it is. I mean, when we get stuck in that kind of loop, we've got to get out of it. But that's a kind of basic self-awareness that we need to have in receiving feedback. I think we need to dismantle the distortions that some of us have from all or nothing thinking about ourselves, or static labels. I'm always this, or this always happens to me, or I'm just this kind of person. So the first step in learning to receive feedback well is some self-understanding and some self-awareness about how this thing happens. And then they have some other suggestions, which they describe as triggers. That's a word we probably all know. What triggers us? So it's such a common word in our world today. People get triggered. Well, they use that in terms of truth triggers, relationship triggers, and identity triggers that defeat our receiving feedback. A truth trigger is that our tendency is to wrong spot. When somebody is giving us feedback, we end up, most of us, sort of listening for what's wrong in what they're saying. We perceive it to be wrong, unfair, or unhelpful. That's coming out of our resistance. So it's hard to hear what might be right in what's being said, because we're looking for the truth, and the truth's not in them who's giving it to us, but in us who's receiving it, and so it gets in our way. We don't recognize that there might be a little truth in what's being said that we really need to pay attention to. The other is relationship triggers, and that has to do with who's giving us the feedback. You probably know, as I do, that there are some people that I can receive feedback from almost no matter what they say, and other people, they don't have a snowballs, because I'm not going to be able to receive it from them, because the relationship is freighted or weighted in a way that makes it harder to receive that feedback. So I don't trust them. I think they're giving the feedback in some disrespectful way, or they have motives that I don't trust, or their credibility isn't good. So there's relationship issues that get in the way of receiving feedback. And then briefly on identity triggers, that goes back to us, who we think we are, as persons and what may get in the way. When critical feedback comes, we can feel that our story, who I am is, as we said before, being attacked. The other sense of that is if we have a sense that we are who we are and we're not able to change much, kind of like this is who I am and I've always been this way and I probably never will be different, it's going to be more difficult to receive feedback than if we hold an attitude about ourselves that says, I can change, I'm able to grow and learn, and in fact, I have a history of being able to make changes. So they have this other saying that you are the most important person in your own learning. And so it has to do with how we think about ourselves that may get in the way of our receiving feedback. Identity triggers, truth triggers, and relationship triggers can inhibit our ability to receive feedback.
That's excellent stuff. There's all kinds of things that I'm thinking about myself. And that's all taking place internally to our own process. What can we do externally from the other person to, let's say, draw out the very best from them of what they want to offer?
Well, that's exactly. That's really a good point, because let's take, for example, that a relationship is the sort of the source of the feedback. So there's difficulty or static in the relationship. It will be important to see if we couldn't develop a measure of curiosity about what's being said and bracket the difficulties, as challenging as that may be, to understand what that person is really trying to say to us, because it may have to do with the relationship. So the feedback may really have to do with creating, maintaining, restoring the relationship itself. And so we have to step back long enough to begin to ask some questions. What is it that you really want me to hear? Help me understand what you're saying. Give me an example so that that's if we can get over our first inclination, which is to wrong spot. Let me tell you how you're wrong in giving me this feedback. If we understand it to be about the relationship. So that's an example of the internal work that we need to do to receive the feedback well.
And then, of course, that ends up developing and growing the relationship with a person in that feedback situation, too.
That's right. Some of the feedback that we receive in relationships is problematic because of the intersections of difference or the roles and role clash. They have authority or have a power. There's a difference there, or they're in a different role. It's the bishop giving us feedback or something. And so we have to kind of find the center for ourselves to be able to be in that place to receive the feedback. I think the other thing to think about in receiving feedback is they have another adage, which I think is really good. The story you tell about the feedback you get has a huge impact on how you feel about it. Let's think about that for a minute. The story that I tell about the feedback I get has a huge impact on how I feel about it. So if I get some feedback and I get ruminative and chew on it, there's something going on about what I am doing, how what I'm saying about the feedback, what I am saying about the feedback I'm receiving. And I need to stop and listen to what I am doing with that feedback so I can hear the feedback itself, because I'm bringing stuff to it. I'm bringing something to that feedback that's getting in my way of my ears.
That is immensely helpful. In fact, it's funny. One of the last church leader tools I recorded was on the topic of crucial conversations, and in that book as well, they talked about the stories that you tell yourself between what you experience, what you hear, or what you see, and how you feel about it. And it's made me realize just in the last month or two since I read that book that sometimes I tell myself completely false stories And that changes that. So, being accurate and thinking through those stories is very helpful.
It's kind of interesting, isn't it? That what's happening when we're getting feedback is kind of like two channels are operating, and they may or may not be communicating. So I'm listening to this feedback while I'm listening to my own internal response to the feedback. And the degree to which I'm listening more to what's going on in me makes it harder to listen to what's going or coming from the other person to me that I may actually need to hear. So it's hard work. Receiving feedback isn't a matter of technique. It's an art, and it's hard work.
Are there other things we can do as well to help receive better feedback and be better in that situation?
I think there is. I think that it might be helpful to first understand the context that we're receiving this. Is this feedback an attempt to provide some kind of appreciation that it may be going off the rails, but it really is intended to be positive? Or is it coaching, and am I ready and able to hear that coaching? I'll have more to say about that in a minute. Or is it evaluation? And so not to mix these things up, to try to separate them out. What is this feedback all about? I think it's important to clarify the giver's purpose, and not to assume that we know. And so to ask what really matters to the person. I want to understand what you're saying to me. Can you tell me a little bit more about your concern, or help me understand what it is that you're saying? The other thing, it's kind of knowing what's the interest of the giver. Is it to help you, or help themselves in the relationship, or help advance the work that you're both doing together? So it comes down, doesn't it, Stu, to taking the time to listen well, clarify, ask questions, and spend time with the person trying to give feedback so that we actually hear what they're saying, digging under the labels, and then being sure that we let the feedback giver know that we understand. I like that old phrase we used to use, what I hear you saying is, do I understand you to be saying this? Can I try to tell you what I hear you saying? Did I hear it correctly? That kind of effortful and attentive listening to feedback means that even if you don't agree with the feedback, you end up maintaining the relationship to the feedback giver, and maybe later something else will happen that will be helpful.
I have often said to people, one of my favorite phrases is, I was thinking about our conversation. And
Yes.
it just means you can come back to it and continue to grow and learn, especially because I think for pastors, a lot of it occurs on Sunday morning where there really isn't the time or the context to listen carefully and to really draw out, as you were describing, the full both purpose and meaning of what they're sharing.
Absolutely. Which brings up another point. If I know that what's happening is that someone's trying to give me feedback and it sounds important, and I'm able to acknowledge this sounds important, or at least it's important to the person giving it. It may be, since we're in control of receiving the feedback, and that's important to remember, we are in control of whether we receive this feedback or not. We can allow ourselves to receive it, or we can let everything get in our way. We could say to a person, this sounds important, but I'm not able to hear what you're saying to me in this moment. Could we arrange a time when we could talk more about this? That can happen. That kind of redirect can happen anytime we're in a situation where feedback is coming our way, but we're just not able to receive it in the moment, but want to acknowledge the giver as important enough to spend some time with and listen to.
I think that When you mention relationship building, that adds a whole lot of credibility and depth to the relationship that you really care about what they're sharing.
Exactly. And yeah, I do recognize as you do that there are people from whom we get feedback and almost on a regular basis, again, who don't fall into the category of relationship which we're going to give much credibility. But we can treat their efforts to give us feedback with the respect that it's due, and not get and help ourselves not to get triggered by it. And that's hard work too, but it's important to do. I think there are a couple other things too that we might want to think about in this regard. When we also can ask for feedback. We can ask our parishioners, people we trust, to give us feedback. We can ask our peers. We can ask our colleagues in ministry, and there might be. I came across a four-question approach to asking for feedback. I don't know its source. It's been around for a long time for me, but the four questions that could be asked are, one is, what do you understand to be my greatest strength? Another question might be, what do you appreciate most in your interactions with me? And the third question is, what do you wish I would do more of or less of? And then a fourth one, which is kind of interesting to talk about, which would be, what gift would you like to give me? Now that would happen in a asking for feedback in which you set up a time and you were clear with the person that this is what you were doing. But those four questions are positive and challenging at the same time.
Like one of the contexts I can think about those questions. In fact, I'm gonna jot them down and take them to my mutual ministry committee. It's part of our goal as a synod, and I think for most congregations a very healthy thing to have a mutual ministry committee. But then the question often is, well, what do we do when we get together? And having a list like that, I actually have my own list, but I think there's some great additions that I'm gonna add to that list to say, here's what we're gonna discuss to help grow and get that feedback better to grow and improve.
Right. Stone and Heen talk about a one-question approach, if you will, but variations on the one question, which is, what's the one thing? So if you went to the mutual ministry group, for example, and said, what's the one thing that you most want me to know, or what is most important for me to know, or name one thing about my preaching, or name one thing about my administration or something like that, or what's the one thing that you see me doing that gets in my way. So you frame the inquiry with clarity about a one thing, and you're not then asking for a list, although you'll get more than one thing. But that's another way to think about how we might ask for feedback, in the mutual ministry or in a peer group, or even from the bishop. What's the one thing, Bishop, that you want me to know?
Well, one of the things that's great about that strategy is when I get 20 things, it's hard for any of us, as much as we want to change and improve, to change 20 things, but we can work on one thing at a time and probably do that well.
Right, exactly. And we could ask 20 people, what's the one thing? And we might get 20 different things, but those 20 people represent perhaps, it's some people know about the 360 reviews where you ask a circle of identified persons that work with you that can provide you feedback about a couple of different things, but from different perspectives. So we could ask the same question of several different people and then collect a good bit of information about what we may need to know most about. So we get the feedback all the time, whether we're ready for it or not, but we can also choose when, how, from whom we get feedback. And I think we get better at it the more we practice it. It's like anything else. If I practice it, I can kind of be aware of the triggers and be aware of what gets in my way because I'm putting that muscle to work, if you will. I'm exercising that. And thus, when it's sprung on me, I'm able to say, whoops, this is what I need to pay attention to.
Well, in that way, receiving feedback is a skill like any other that can be developed.
Exactly. I wonder if we might take a moment and also put this in, put it in a kind of, theological context. If I may be so bold as to step into that territory.
Absolutely. Throw some theology in there.
Well, it's a couple of thoughts for us pastors to take to heart, and probably isn't new to us, but it's helpful to be reminded of. Because, I think about it this way. In and from Jesus, we have received the most important feedback of our lives. That we are redeemed and made whole, and we are a new creation. So we're beloved children of God, and nothing can separate us from God's love. And holding to this truth above all else can make the difference. So if the difficulty in receiving feedback lies at the heart of the tension between growing and acceptance of who we are, then we need look no further than to the one who accepts us just the way we are, and yet invites us to grow into the new creation that we are also. So, right there, we have a foundation of understanding ourselves fundamentally in a way that when I'm allowing myself to be aware of that and holding on to it, feedback from anyone else is only that which can help, and that which hurts I can more easily let go of because I'm a beloved child of God and one who is loved just the way I am. That's one thought.
I'm almost waiting for the other shoe to drop. Like Lutherans love like law and gospel.
There you are.
There's the other side of that continuum, right?
Right. Well, when I think about it again, there's this: I'm loved as just who I am, and yet I am continually invited by God, by Jesus, into becoming the new creation. I may be it, but my task, if you will, if there's anything about this, is to continue to allow myself to be shaped by the Spirit and formed by God into that new creation. It may be given to me, but that doesn't mean I am it. So there's the growth. I think there's another thing that I really believe this to be true, and that it's important for us to bear in mind and take heart, because I really believe that God and Jesus actually thanks you, thanks me, thanks us for our ministry. That there is if you will, a gratitude to every pastor that's hearing this, every ministry leader. I bet there's something Jesus would say that you did well. In the parable of the servants waiting for their master to come back, there really are those who get to hear the master say, "Well done, good and faithful servant." Yeah, if we think about the fact that we do this by the grace of God, but that God appreciates our doing this as one of God's very own, that we are that we are held in that way as well as loved. It can be remarkably transforming on days when the feedback is less than ideal.
So, John, I've really enjoyed this interview, and you've given me lots to think about, and I think our listeners as well. Are there any other things you absolutely wanted to share about receiving feedback?
Well, I would urge our colleagues to get this book, and I think Stu, I think I've provided you a couple of links. There's some really excellent YouTube links out there that show Heen and Stone presenting their work. They do it better than I do. Some are short, some are long, but a little bit of time spent on this is really worth it. If only the next time we receive feedback, we're able to say, let me take a breath here and realize this isn't a do or die. And what do I need to hear? Probably will make all our days just a little easier.
Excellent. Yeah, absolutely. I can definitely think that these skills would be helpful, and I will absolutely put those links in the digging deeper section on the website.
I appreciate the chance to talk with you, Stu. Do you have any other thought about this yourself?
No, I can absolutely see where this would be a helpful skill to kind of add, and I'll be curious to watch those videos and maybe get the book as well and kind of dig a little bit deeper in this because I can definitely see how receiving feedback in more effective ways will grow my effectiveness as a leader, and I think for all this that all of us who receive feedback, which is most everybody.
Yeah. Well, maybe it's good to close on a note that Stone and Heen say that when we get good at receiving feedback, even our toughest feedback interactions come to feel a little less threatening.
There you go. There you go. John, I really appreciate the time with you and the interview.
Stu, it's been my pleasure, and I look forward to more opportunities and see you soon.
Take care. God bless.
Thank you very much, Stu.